down. Spot.
I'm gonna tell them that we're taking a break and then we'll be starting shortly. We're in a brief recess and we'll be starting shortly.
Yeah. Looks like we're back. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. I do want to make an announcement here. We had some issues with Zoom earlier during this meeting. If anyone would like to submit or make a comment regarding action item A about the CEDs, we can definitely entertain that or take a note or via email and pass it on to City Council. For our next step, we're going to be moving over to a discussion item. Agenda item number 3, discussion items A, outdoor uses and activities in the mixed use and commercial districts. So staff, do we have anything?
We do. So first of all, you have just like to cover what you have in your packet. This evening is a staff report, of course. It's a summary report. You also have the existing additional development standards that are currently in the zoning ordinance. And then you have let's see, it doesn't look like my packet has everything. Oh, there it does. Okay, you also have a temporary use of land permit that staff issued for certain businesses here in town. Those are active at this point. But this is the application form that everybody signed to receive an automatic temporary use of land permit. So you have these things in your staff report, and I'd just like to sort of briefly go over the history here, because as city manager often reminds me, people forget. So here we are a few months after the actual controversy over the existing relevance of section 11-04-030, in particular subsection B, which refers to the outdoor, the prohibition against the conduct of uses outside an enclosed building. And that prohibition extends to all land uses in the city, which of course, depending on your knowledge of local ordinance development, is there for particular reasons. We haven't outlined what those reasons might be, only that it doesn't seem to make sense to a lot of people these days that some kinds of activities just absolutely have to be conducted indoors, especially in this particular climate when there's a lot of activities that could conceivably be conducted outdoors and contribute to the vitality of our downtown district and the sustainability, resiliency of several of our businesses who like to participate in those activities. So with that in mind, the staff report does go through the history here with respect to this particular issue. We call out 11-04030B in particular because it is unique among the requirements of 11-04030. In particular, the other sections A, C, and D seem to relate to the ability of the city to control adverse impacts that one business may have on another or on surrounding land uses, resulting from some sort of noxious activity, odors, noise, and various things that could conflict between businesses that are really hazardous, for example, or need to be have some sort of special permit accordingly. So what we've tried to do here is we've tried to restructure, and I just like to say this is a starting point for discussion. This is not a proposed ordinance that staff has. It's oftentimes difficult for people to see how things might be reconstructed without having a starting point. Something that you can say, well, I like the way that's done, but can we do it a little differently? And this is where I'd like to see things tweaked, or I'd like to see things unchanged. And, so that's what this is. And on purpose, I did not include reference to other portions of the zoning ordinance that would have to be changed if the structure here is put in place. So, for example, there are some there's a reference to an administrative permit that doesn't exist in the zoning ordinance currently. So that would have to be added. We would have to add findings and so forth and a procedure for those permits. And in the staff report, I characterize this particular approach that I've provided in this example. It's very similar to what the city currently has with respect to home occupations. And I think I've described this to you before. There are certain kinds of things that get a pass. You do conduct your business in your home and nobody knows you're there conducting your business in your home. There's no outward appearance. You're not having customers. You're not having deliveries. You're just basically doing your business there. That gets a pass. Then you sort of ramp up in the next category to things that require some further review and could present a problem to surrounding land uses. And those then go to the planning commission in sort of a use permit format. And then there's a set of prohibited uses, things that home occupations cannot do. And so if you look at the structure of the preliminary draft, I've tried to structure this particular approach similarly. So in one instance, for example, and I'd like to just sort of show you something before I get started here to sort of go over what actually, I see I didn't put it up like I thought I would, but let me get it. And now I'll share my screen. Here we go. So this is the current zoning ordinance structure with respect to these particular areas. And you can see here 11-04030 is the particular section that we care about this evening. And 04030 is actually it just relates to commercial and industrial districts. And so in looking at this particular section, it was important to see, okay, well, if we're going to make changes, where should they rest? If we're going to move section 030B, which is this particular section here, out of this 03040 section that has standards for industrial and commercial districts that seem to be appropriate for problem children, then where would it go? And really what it entails is a new section of this particular chapter. And that new section would incorporate provisions for outdoor retail sales and activities, outdoor activities in general, that could occur in either the mixed use or commercial districts, and leaving out the opportunity for industrial districts for now to just by right having outdoor uses or outdoor activities. And so what I'll do is I'll go through the draft, and you can see that the mixed use development standards that are currently in this portion of the zoning ordinance, I left alone. Because these particular standards here in 020 are all about development and how mixed use projects should be developed, and the incentives that the city has established for development in the mixed use areas that promote pedestrian activity and vitality. So 020 is really all about what kind of commercial district do we want to have as a mixed use. So it emphasizes plazas, public spaces, it provides a reward for those developments that incorporate those particular kinds of spaces within the project, and provides, some incentives for that to occur. So I left all that alone because I thought that's really good stuff. We want to incentivize mixed use development to encourage pedestrian activity and vitality, connection between businesses, and those relationships that occur at the pedestrian level. And that's what 020 is all about. So if the commission feels differently, that there should be things added to the mixed use district in 020, then we can certainly do that. My recommendation would be that we wait to the 3rd Street Master Plan to make those changes, because they are all about development and incentives rather than use and performance, that kind of thing. So, so what I'd like to do then is have you just sort of walk you through the preliminary. Well, first of all, with respect to the history, in the temporary use of land permit that we currently allow. And I'll share my screen for that as well, because I think it's important, because it's an essential bridge between what we're doing in this particular ordinance and what we've allowed to occur temporarily. So in the temporary use of land permit ordinance, we said that if you have a business, an outdoor retail sale, dining, or you have a personal service, then you can conduct your business outdoors, provided you have a suitable site. And then you can sell your own stuff, you can display your own stuff, or you can do your own dining, or you can offer that opportunity to another business legally operating in the city. So if somebody has a business license and a health department permit as appropriate, they can conduct business in the city, provided that they are also in compliance with the rest of these standards. And then, as I said before, they have to be legally operating. And then they can install an A-frame sign. Currently, there's an A-frame sign prohibition in town. So the temporary uses are allowed one A-frame sign, provided it doesn't interrupt any flow of pedestrian accessibility. And then the outdoor sale of merchandise, personal services will only occur during times when the business is open. So you can't have a closed business and then somebody decides to do an outdoor activity when your business is not operating. That is something that we didn't feel was appropriate. And then the important thing here is that it's all on private property. So these temporary use of land permits were not allowed to occur on the sidewalk or in the street. They could occur in a parklet because those are already authorized by the city while they last. That would be appropriate. So that sort of provided a level of comfort for people while we look at the ordinance that's under consideration. And I think there's a lot of satisfaction that people have had in town based on this temporary use of land permit, and it makes me feel as though that kind of activity seems to be okay. The town seems to, and businesses seem to tolerate it pretty well. I haven't had any complaints necessarily. People are relaxed about it. And so, you know, I think it's a good starting point for considering what might be in the ordinance eventually in terms of, you know, the actual change. So, and just looking at the staff report real briefly, let's see here. Let me share this. Okay, so in the staff report, I kind of go through the history here, but I also say what the preliminary draft does and doesn't do. So as I mentioned before, we retain the existing pedestrian-oriented development standards in the MU district. We establish separate provisions that address outdoor product display and sales, because currently in the zoning ordinance, outdoor display of merchandise is okay, provided you have a specialty shop. Well, that seems to me to be an appropriate level of control over, you know, what happens on the sidewalk and so forth. So I think that was purposely established as a restriction. And so this particular draft retains that restriction. It establishes, as I said before, a 3-tier permit regime for permits, starting with outdoor displays, then to things that can be conducted without a permit, just with an administrative review, similar to the temporary use of land permit, and then all the way to a conditional use permit where certain kinds of activities are conducted in a certain way. And so I'll go through those in a minute. And then you have let's see here. So then there is a new, not only is there a new, in this preliminary draft, is there a new administrative permit, there's also a new use permit requirement. So we have existing conditional use permit for people that want to conduct dining outdoors. There's a new use permit requirement for other kinds of things that are done on private property that might need a special look by the planning commission, or a more careful look. Then this draft, it retains the requirements for certain uses in the I district, and maintains the requirement that uses in the industrial areas are conducted indoors unless they get a use permit. So it's not a blanket prohibition like it is now. Certain kinds of things, like for example, if you've got a nursery that provides aggregate resources, you're not going to want to put that in the building. You're going to want to put that in bins that people can access, or that equipment can access to make an appropriate load for you to purchase. And so that's just an example. If you've got a lumber yard, you can't really store your lumber, all your lumber indoors. That doesn't make sense. So some kinds of things just don't make sense to be in an enclosed building. Some do, some need to be controlled in that way. One of the reasons that we don't have cannabis uses in town is because the cannabis ordinance requires all the cannabis oriented uses to be conducted indoors. And the requirements for indoor cannabis activities are very strict in terms of, you know, a solid floor, impermeable surface. You have to have a solid connection between the walls and flooring. You know, it's just very exhaustive. So we're not messing with any of that in the cannabis ordinance in this draft. And then the performance standards in 04, 030, I've retained those because I know some council members were saying, well, you know, you couldn't operate, you couldn't have an x-ray machine. Well, that's really not how, that would not be my interpretation of those restrictions. You know, it's all about what's harmful outside the building to an adjacent use or surrounding neighborhood, which x-ray machines are. So anyway, so then So that kind of gives you sort of an outline of what's in this draft. And so what I'd like to do is just sort of run through the draft itself. And then if you have questions about that, if you're comfortable with that process, I can go forward and do that. So as I said before, I felt it was important to establish a separate section that would address all the requirements for all commercial districts, whether it's a mixed use, commercial or industrial district. And so what I did was I took out all of this stuff in 030, and I made it so that you could have these activities outdoors in the commercial and the mixed use districts. And then you had to, if you wanted to do outdoor activities or certain kinds of activities in the industrial district, there's a new use permit requirement there. So I'll just run through this real quick. Then if you have questions, we can get into the details. So the MU district is described, and then similarly, retains the it retains the performance requirements for MU uses in the MU district with respect to residential uses and the mix of uses and how those are supposed to be designed. All those standards are maintained in this draft. So that there's no change there. Then with respect to pedestrian amenity improvements, those are also replicated from the existing ordinance, as I said before. So those aren't changed. And then in section B, the first section A addresses all the MU district development standards that we want to keep. Following in section B, uses activities in the preamble to this particular section, you see that we set up a structure where they're permitted, they allowed with an administrative permit by the community development director, or require the approval of a use permit. So those are the three categories of activities that are covered in section B. So in the first case, product displays, as I said before, those are allowed if they meet the standards in the ordinance, they're allowed, no permit required. Under section 2, so that's section 1, product displays, that's the first level, allowed by right. Section 2, product sale of products, dining, conduct of personal services, requiring an administrative permit. So here you see the requirements for a business that wants to conduct activities outside that would qualify for an administrative permit issued by staff. If they are conducting these activities on private property, in a plaza, courtyard, or linkage between buildings, which is language currently in the ordinance itself, they can go ahead and get an administrative permit. If they can have one A-frame sign, that's okay for an administrative permit. Products are displayed for sale so that the path of travel is maintained. Sale of product and services outside will only occur during time when businesses are open, similar to what's currently the case. There are no building alterations that would require another kind of permit, like a site and design review permit. There's an opportunity for one mobile food vendor at a time on property with an administrative permit. And then they have to have a current business license and a health permit as needed. So they have to be legally operating in the community. Then in the third section of B, the sale of products, dining, and the conduct of personal services where a conditional use permit is required. So here you see the third tier of permits come into play. And so they can operate in the community if they're under certain conditions, if it's conducted within an area capable intended, improved, or approved for private on-site parking. So the first cut for an activity, outdoor activity that requires a use permit is that the place where you intend to have these activities is in a parking area. Either that's approved, intended, or approved for on-site private parking as a part of the use itself. So that's sort of a basic requirement for or threshold for uses that are going to require a use permit. If there's amplified music proposed, you need a use permit. If there are food trucks, when more than one vendor, such vendor is proposed on the same site at the same time, then it needs a use permit. Then, if it's on a site containing a designated historical resource, it needs a use permit. If its status code is 5 or lower. 5 or lower means it's got, it's on the local register, been evaluated, it's locally significant, and then the lower ones, 4, 3, 2, 1, they're on the register, either the local, state, or national register. So in those cases, we want to see that there's been an evaluation done within the previous year to make sure that it is in fact got the correct status code. So we have a lot of these buildings in our inventory, structures in our inventory that have a status code of 7. Status code of 7 means it needs to be evaluated by our historical resources consultant. If that has been done and it has a status code of 5 or lower within the past year, then it needs a use permit. If it's been evaluated and it has a status code of 6, then it's been evaluated and determined to be not historically significant. So we're looking for an evaluation of some kind that gives us a clue regarding how significant the resource is on a particular site. If it is 5 or lower, needs a use permit. Improvements to a site or building also require a site plan and design review permit. If there are site alterations involved, structural alterations or improvements that need a site design review permit, a lot of times you've got historical resources. In order to accommodate the outdoor activity, if it needs a site design review, it needs a use permit, according to what this preliminary draft says. Then, if in the opinion of staff, and usually it's a planning director or could be the city manager, whoever. In this case, I just stuck the community development director in because that's the highest level planning staff person we have, may potentially adversely affect the use of enjoyment. So let's say, for example, you've got sort of something that's on the margin of maybe having a conflict with an adjacent use. It's next to a residential use. Maybe you might want to have a more careful look at noise control or the way ingress and egress works, that kind of thing. But you're just not quite sure whether you feel comfortable approving it administratively, then it gets kicked up into a use permit requirement. But that's a judgment call. Most planning directors will not make that judgment. If there's anything that looks like it needs a use permit, it will go to the planning commission. But that's there sort of as a way for people to make a discretionary decision based on the character of the individual use. Then in the industrial district, there's as I said, a new use permit requirement that says that all uses need to be conducted within an enclosed building unless you get a use permit. And then in the use, it doesn't say you can't do it at all. Right now, it says you can't do it at all, even with a use permit. So this provides the opportunity for the planning commission to look at characteristics of the use and agree that some things make sense to be conducted outdoors, provided that the appropriate performance standards are adhered to. So lighting, for example, or there could be some dust control measures, or maybe you want some stuff done on a paved surface instead of dirt or gravel. Those kinds of things would come into play with that. And then in 11-04030, recommending that we just keep those performance standards the way they are. So that's kind of, the way this thing's structured. Like I said, this is a starting point. It allows you to see, okay, well, there are different ways to treat these uses depending on the character of the use. And do you want to do that? And are you comfortable having, maintaining the by right for displays? Are you comfortable with having an administrative permit, which is a new permit, not typical for San Juan Bautista, where everything goes to the planning commission if it's discretionary at all? I think this is an easier take. The administrative permit route is an easier take on things that look like they're probably going to be okay. We just need to make sure that there's a review. There you have it.
Thank you.
And this is for discussion, so no need to make a decision tonight.
Cool. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I have a couple of comments. I have questions. So in there, I know you went over and just said you can only have one food truck.
Well, actually, I didn't say you could only have one. I said that if you had more than one, you need a use permit.
Use permit.
Yeah.
Are we able to just change that? I mean, I'm not saying, obviously you can't fit so many food trucks on someone's property, but there was a time where Vertigo did have, I think, 2 food trucks, and they did fit comfortably well, and it worked. It actually brought out, I think, more people. And so, in other words, what I'm trying to get at is, do we need to make another permit to go through? I hate to see it get complicated. I kind of want it just to be an ordinance where these businesses is just, it's easy, it's business friendly. In other words, it's just easy to get, it's easy to work with. In other words, is Hollister, I know they just approved a food truck ordinance. Do they have a permit that you have to go through? I hear from vendors that it's really easy to do stuff like that in Hollister, and that's why a lot of these businesses and pop-up stuff, it's going that way. So I want to track that here, but if we make it hard or kind of hoops to jump over, we might lose that opportunity, right? These people might go. So is there any way for us to build that into the ordinance where we don't require a permit? It's just there.
Well, I mean, of course, you can recommend, any number of standards. If that's why we're having this discussion. So yes, of course. The question is, how many do you want to have before you start needing to take a look at how these things are being arranged? Do you want to have, for example, more than one food truck in an area that's intended or approved for parking, without having any pavement surface, for example? Do you want to have a and then do you want to have an assembly of trucks? If you want to have an assembly of trucks, how many is right? What's the right number? And so, the easy answer is that, well, if you have one, no big deal. But if you start to have an aggregation of mobile food vendors on your site, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4, then, when does the permit, when do we really care how many you have? What is happening on the site with respect to access and circulation or parking or any of those kinds of things? So for example, with a use permit, you can say you get a chance to have more than one truck on your property at the same time, but you can only do it so many days a week. Right now, if you have a use permit for outdoor dining on your property, you can have 1, 2 or more every day. And so, the use permit gets you access to looking at the characteristics of the particular property and the operation to say, okay, well, what is an appropriate sort of standard of review. It's got to be on a case by case basis because every site's different. So I've noticed that, yes, Vertigo does have a couple of food trucks. I know that 507 Third or 507 Third, Dante Baines property, will have another food truck on there of a different type. There isn't anything that says that they can't. Next door, 18th Barrel can have more than one if they like.
Yeah.
So, we had a request today for somebody that wanted to put a food truck adjacent on the street to Hardina's, and Hardina's said, well, yeah, sure, that's fine. We'll give approval so that you can be on our side street. But the answer is no, because you're not on private property. So, for these uses that are on private property, I agree with you, should be nice and easy, straightforward. And then the question is for the city,
What is
for
too much?
staff, but what can we tolerate in terms of letting freedom reign, in terms of the level of activity, more than one truck at a time.
Got it. Yeah, because I'm not saying you can have like 10 trucks, but I mean, maybe that we cap it at, 3 or
Well, there
2.
you go. That's a
Yeah,
number.
I'm not saying
Right.
it has to be 100 trucks, but yeah, and obviously at that point when you go to a food truck festival, it attracts a lot of people. So eventually that becomes a special event. So
I was thinking, if it's my business, and I put out one truck and I put out 2 or 3, I'm thinking, if I put 5 out there, it's gonna work. I mean, for my business on private property, you might say that there might be a parking issue.
Yeah.
Because of that, I understand, because that's where the parking goes, but if it's not, I don't know.
So in that case, you would say, doesn't need a use permit if it's not using on-site parking in any way, and then you can have as many as you like, or
Yeah.
up to a certain, whatever.
yeah, because
whatever the
no
number
one's
is.
lot here can accommodate like 50 trucks or anything like that.
I think it's what happens to private property beyond the use, the area that's being used. What's gonna happen to other private parking, it's a private property, on the street,
Right,
or somebody else's resident or business,
right.
so now you have, if the neighbor of that business says, okay, let's do it anyway, I mean, that's different.
Yeah, well, the other thing too is that you've got, when you have multiple trucks and you have a lot of activity, the question is what happens with respect to the building code? And what kind of accessibility standards do you need to have? With one truck, there's not going to be an issue, one truck. With 2 or more trucks, there could be some accessibility issues. There could be some issues involving assembly. There could be, for example, with one of the uses that we have, they didn't know that they needed to make the bathroom on site accessible to the people who are running the truck. So they had to then leave the site and go to the park to use the restroom to wash their hands. Well, that is a problem. So you've got a food operation there where the people can't wash their hands on site. Well, that doesn't float at all. So, some of these are considerations that, you don't run into with one, you do, but you can catch them. But then the probability is that you could run into them with multiples.
Okay.
And do you want to take a special look in those circumstances?
Yeah, because for me, I don't mind 2, maybe 3, but yeah, if it's any more, maybe it's considered a special event. But again, I don't know how many lots we have that can fit that many. In other words, what I'm trying to get at is I want to be as business friendly and welcoming in San Juan, because when I spoke with others, the commissioners or whoever from Hollister asking, hey, why do you guys get all the business? Why does everything go that way? And the simple answer is we make it easy. And so we need to get ourselves in that mindset and be supportive in that way so that it is easy. But I do want to be mindful. I don't want it to turn into
And I purposely kept it to a low standard. or on the reverse side, a high standard. Knowing that, if I had proposed a preliminary draft that said you could have 3, well, why did you choose 3? It's easy to explain why I chose 1,
Got it.
as an example.
Mhm.
So, again, it's just preliminary draft for
Got it.
discussion, and it can go any direction the city feels is appropriate.
Cool.
So, yeah.
And then the
Sorry,
other,
Dan, didn't mean to interrupt
you
you.
want to go in?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think there's a danger here. And a propensity to get lost in the weeds and with how many trucks and all that stuff. I mean, we could get down to a level of minutia with this proposed draft that would be here till midnight. So I just kind of had I had a question about process, maybe like what is it we're doing here exactly? And then perhaps maybe the best use of our time is to stay up at 30,000 feet and talk about, attributes, perhaps instead of wordsmithing and counting and so forth, because like I said, we could be here for a long time. And so, and as my question about process is it your vision, Brian, that you will write this ordinance revision subject to comments and edits from here, or do we have an opportunity to suggest language or approaches or things like that?
Yeah, of course. Like most things, it's hard to imagine what you want something to look like, or how it should operate without something to react to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
No, I
this is
understand
something
that.
to react to, as I'm definitely hearing that maybe this particular approach with respect to numbers and so forth, and this tiered process might not be appropriate. Maybe we need to look at more performance oriented stuff like what you're mentioning with respect to attributes.
Yeah, and so can I just continue, I guess? So back when we were dealing with this a lot, Jose and I know Jose then worked with you quite a bit. I was thinking about how to, I was talking with Mayor Jordan about this as well, how to kind of crack this nut. And one of the things this is what I came up with. Can you just hand it to Brian? It's kind of a different approach, Brian, which is to separate industrial and commercial into separate sections. I saw that 050 was repealed. So there's kind of an open space there. So I was thinking of moving mobile home park standards to 050. As you can see, have 040 be its own separate section dealing just with industrial. And you hear that 22. And as I think I mentioned when you and I and Jose and Rich Brown were talking at one time, it looks to me that somebody took 030. I think it started as an industrial provision, to be honest with you, and someone just stuck some commercial post-it notes on it.
Yeah.
And query from the statutory drafting standpoint, I just thought it was really tough to create something that covers both industrial and commercial, because they don't have a whole lot to do with one another. I mean, except to the extent that industrials for money, for revenue, but other than that, industrial uses and commercial uses are so different. Would it behoove us to have commercial be its own separate section in which you could we could really put a fine point on dining, for example, outdoor dining and drinking establishments and so forth. Back then I looked at the municipal code of Carmel by the Sea, and they've got a great code, and they handled those uses that way. And incidentally, as to other uses that were consistent or compatible with whatever it was, they refer to those as ancillary uses. And the ancillary use has to have some level of compatibility with the host use as determined by staff. So it's kind of interesting, all the different ways you can treat all the nuances within commercial. But industrial seems like it should be kind of, to me anyway, seems like it should be kind of broken out and treated separately, and then really do a fine job on commercial. One just editorial comment, I have found it over the years to be exceedingly difficult darn near maybe impossible, some might say, to draft anything by committee. It's really hard. When Chris Martirana and I did the cannabis ordinance when we were on the city council, it was just we were a subcommittee. It was just he and I meeting over at my office, and we had
Made it tough.
we did on purpose. All the things you mentioned were very intentional.
Yeah.
Primarily because of odor and runoff. There's a perception that a lot of chemicals and fertilizers used with the plants would run off and get into the groundwater. So everything you mentioned had a reason behind it.
Mhm.
But anyway, so we came up with the cannabis ordinance over a series. Chris and I, as the subcommittee, over a series of a bunch of meetings, working with consultant Victor Gomez. And even then it was hard, but 5 people, something might be a little bit tough. So instead of, wordsmithing or anything, those are my only thoughts is, query whether it would benefit us better to break commercial out of industrial and really cover those nuances. And then as far as an overall attribute, I think that I would be a big proponent of, and this is going to be purposefully vague, what I'm about to say, pushing as much as we can towards administrative review, or almost over the counter kind of stuff, to give you, Don, whomever in that role, a lot of discretion in issuing these types of permits. It's been my experience that conditional use CUPs can be, yes, you're exactly right. CUPs give the planning commission and the city a lot of latitude in conditioning light, noise, hours. You can condition anything on a use. So that's the good news for the city. But from the applicant standpoint, CUPs are kind of a pain.
They are.
And they take a long time. They can be expensive sometimes. And I would like, kind of echoing what the chair was saying, just in general, I would like to have our approach to, now I'm dealing specifically with this pop-up issue,
Sure.
not commercial in general. But as to the pop-up issue, I would like it to be as easy as possible. Protecting the interests of neighboring landowners, the city, the things that are worthy of being cognizant of, but at the same time, not making the gal that sells soap from Santa Cruz, making her life really difficult.
Yeah, I think that the way this version is structured with the administrative permit will do that. It will give those particular kinds of businesses the easiest route possible. So the only other thing that we could do that would make it even easier is to establish, in addition to the display by right, have certain kinds of pop-up outdoor retail be also by right, not administrative permit. But if you're on a private property, you're in a plaza, you're in a courtyard, you've got the opportunity, much like the temporary use of land permit, you can meet these certain criteria, you can go. Just get a business license and go for it. Make sure that you're the host, make sure that your people that come into your place have a business license and the appropriate health permit if they're selling food. Because we talked to Bears Hideaway. That was her suggestion, was that the first cut that we had with temporary use of land permits was that we didn't have anything related. We said no food. Well, she was like, well, that's not really reasonable. And we're like, well, yeah, you're right. Because, somebody could want to sell muffins. And so, what's the appropriate standard? So provided they get a health permit was written into those standards. So similarly, you could open the administrative permit by right standard to those circumstances where there's not going to be an issue.
Well, and I think personally, philosophically, I don't think it's too onerous for someone who's planning some type of pop-up type event in the future to come into City Hall, send you an email or something, say, hey, can I come in and talk to you about what I would like to do on August 14th, Saturday, or whatever it is. And then they come in and talk to you and you say, yeah, that sounds fine. Here you go.
Yeah.
And then, so in other words, I would be in favor of granting huge swaths of discretion to you and Don and City Hall and staff, huge amounts. And then the remedy for that is, or what's the danger with that? Well, you or someone in your position could be indiscriminate and just say no arbitrarily or capriciously. And then someone's aggrieved, well, then they could have an appeal to the planning commission. But have you guys handled the lion's share of the heavy lifting on these little pop-uppy things administratively without the CUP process? And it'll only require CUP for situations where a CUP is really necessary.
So maybe we should focus on, well, first of all, I'm really in favor of keeping the by right. You know, like you meet certain criteria, you get a pass, no further review needed. Then if you're in a certain category, certain kinds of activities, you want to have a minimal review. Do you meet the criteria? That's a question. And if the question is, oh, yes, here's your administrative permit. And then if we're just not sure, you know, got some problems with it, maybe there's some hazardous stuff involved, maybe there's some chemical storage that they need to have, or who knows? You know, you need a use permit for that. So maybe what we're talking about is kind of the same thing here. The question is, how open do you want to make the by right? And how broad do you want to make the administrative permit, and how narrow you want to make the conditional use permit?
And I'm just trying to pressure test that against real life examples that I can think of. Like Hawks Peak little makers market thing that they have. I don't know what they even call that thing, but every once in a while, there'll be half a dozen people in there selling honey and all kinds of stuff. That might not necessarily be by right, but might benefit from a chat with you about it. When are you going to be there? When are you going to, do you have, you're not going to leave a bunch of trash behind? Is it safe?
About accessibility.
Accessibility.
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
the main question.
right of way, stuff like that. You know, so that might be worth taking a look. I don't need to, I agree with you. For example, Vertigo, that's what I think everybody thinks of, is they always have little makers out there.
Well, we only have a certain number of businesses to look at.
Do it.
You know.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I mean. It's good thing we're not downtown LA or something. But you know, Vertigo, they have like the gal selling candles. I don't care. I don't think that needs any kind of that should be by right.
Yeah.
You know, people selling crackers in front of Vertigo.
Or somebody
Nobody cares.
has a, for example, one thing that's totally, you know, not, I mean, it's not a problem. Personal service, you know, where, you know, you've got somebody doing a henna tattoo at a table or doing makeup at a table. That's not something that needs an administrative permit. You just put a table out, you're not causing a problem. It's an enticement or enhancement to the business that's there. Who's going to complain about that? No one. And so that really is, you know, somebody's going to have a problem. You know, like I tried to get into that business, I tripped over a chair or table. You know, that indicates there's a problem. There's too much going on there. Or we have, you know, an aggregation of uses. They all have an A-frame sign, each one. I mean, then, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, so some things need to look, as you say. The question is what is it? How do we define that for the purpose of regulation?
Yeah, I want to think back even further. What's in a business license when we apply for a business license? Could we attach to that? What is a business license? What you're entitled to?
Yeah.
When you have that, will that include, could we include that in there?
Yeah.
That you could have one or two.
Well, what I do for home occupations, for example, which is a new thing that I started last year, because it doesn't make any sense to burden home occupations that meet all the requirements. And so previously we had to make them apply for a home occupation permit, charge them $300 to get one. Didn't really make sense. And so we did away with the requirement for a home occupation permit that needed an application, and instead just required a business license. And the business license has a little checkoff for zoning. Is it okay from a zoning standpoint? If yes, it's approved. And they just pay the business license fee. they don't have to pay for, a home occupation permit, because there's really no review involved.
Is there something in there that says a check mark means you get something more than?
Yeah, there's a page that says
Yeah.
denied for a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then they have to go through whatever hoop there is. Sorry, hoops.
I'm feeling like if I have a business license, it entitles me to do a whole bunch of things. What are they? And then anything beyond that, I need to get back. with.
Oh, I see. No, that's not there's no link there between the business license and the zoning sign off. No, there's no connection there in the code. You can't get a business license to do something a code doesn't allow you to do. So if the code requires you to get a use permit, you can't get a business license till you get one. So there's that, there's already that link. Does that make sense to your question?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm just thinking that, what am I entitled to when I have a business license?
Oh, you're entitled to conduct your business in accordance with the laws of the city.
Right.
Yeah.
And it says I can put a.
Retail pop-up
A
or,
pop-up or whatever, it should be included.
I think I get what you're saying.
So you get to a certain number or until you, then you have to get back with another. use permit.
Okay.
So in other words, he's saying, yeah, apply for the business license. Do you meet this criteria? Do you have a patio in the back? Do you have
Yeah,
this and that? Yes, you do. Okay, well then by right, you can have
that's what I was
two,
saying.
yeah,
That's
two
the by
food
right.
trucks and whatever.
Yeah.
And then if you don't, like, I don't meet this, well, then,
You need an administrative permit.
yeah, and it comes to you for review, to take a closer look.
What I'm wondering, resulting from this conversation is whether I just need to come back with something that opens that door a little bit wider for administrative permits. And add a chunk in there, of activities for by right, things that we don't really care about. If you're not conflicting with the accessibility standards and you've got more than one table and a pop-up retail, there's really no problem. And so maybe what we do is you say you get a by right if you have multiple pop-ups, your accessibility standards are okay, and you have one sign that advertises all of, the pop-ups that are there at any one time. So some kind of standard like that. And that way it opens up the by right a little bit wider. And then we also get a little bit more, put more in the administrative permit section. What I would
Take away therefore from the CUP requirement. Diminish them.
yes.
Diminish those that would require CUP.
Yeah.
And put it more on your shoulders.
Yeah, so the next iteration, I would come back with changes that would do that.
Mhm.
That might be something. The other alternative here, from a process standpoint, is that you have the ability, based on city council, direction to the planning commission, to establish an ad hoc committee where you can ask people what they think about, invite them to come to your ad hoc committee meeting and select a couple people, and then have one, and then you can have these work through the issue. Is this kind of what the commission's looking for in the way of a structure and sort of a tiered system like that? And then how close are we? Is it ready to go to the planning commission for recommendation, city council?
That house are pretty efficient.
Yeah, they can be.
I just like the idea that when I go someplace and I want to start a business, the talk is you want to do business here because let me tell you how it's structured. This is great,
Yeah.
and that's the incentive. Is how do we get them to say, well, this is great, and not only that, just by word of mouth alone, it's a great place to do business.
Well, not only that, but, and that's very true. Yeah, because of, yes, exactly. And in the case of home occupations, I found that people would not apply for a home occupation permit because the requirement to get the permit was they had to pay couple $100, and then they had to go through the review, and it was just cumbersome. And they just couldn't stomach it. So they kept conducting their business from their home under the radar and never got a permit. Well, that's not, we want people to approach the city so that we can not be critical, but so that we can sort of say, okay, well, yeah, you're acceptable based on the structure that we have.
Yeah. And make
So
it
it's more
Yeah.
welcoming, and
It's-
people were really happy when we tell them that in order to get a home occupation permit, they just need a business license.
Yeah,
that's
so
what's
let's-
really gratifying.
Yeah, let's make it easy. The easier the better.
Yes, yeah, he used to have one. Yeah.
Well, now you can have a food truck in front of the garage.
Yeah. Now, if you want a food truck with your home occupation permit. Yeah. All right. Okay, good. So what do you think about ad hoc or not?
I'm with it, I think. Right? For me, I feel like it makes sense. Yeah, I say yes. Like an ad hoc.
Well, it's not an action item. I don't know, can they not establish I think you need to have an action item to appoint an ad hoc committee.
Yeah, I think you're just gonna revise
Yeah.
another recommendation and then we can make that.
And then the ad hoc committee I'll put it on the agenda
Yeah, that's
for an action item to establish an ad hoc committee to look at the next iteration.
Yes.
And this one will, be for the record.
Yeah,
So-
no, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, thank you. I want to make it easier on our businesses. I want to be business friendly. I don't want to kick Hollister's butt, you know what I mean? I want San Juan to be the best that it can be, right? And yeah, we want to be welcoming.
We got it right.
Yeah, and we're gonna prove them wrong.
One thing that this doesn't do is it doesn't talk about food trucks as an issue or a topic like food truck court on the public street. It's all,
Yeah, this is just,
Oriented to
this
private
is on
property.
private property, an actual business wanting to host either a pop-up or a food
that's
truck.
a totally separate.
And it's a totally separate thing. If you want to do something on the street, it's called a special event.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so, cool. So I think that takes care of that. Yeah. All right, so now I'm going to open it up to public comments. I'm seeing anyone here in chambers that would like to make a public comment. No, okay, moving on. Anyone in Zoom land that would like to make a public comment?
But if anybody in Zoom wishes to make a public comment, please use the hand raise button. And then wait to be called.
All right, seeing none. Sorry, I'm blanking out. I'm gonna be moving on to an adjournment.
Well,
Or actually, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry. I have the wrong thing.
is there a spot for planning commissioner comments?
Yeah, no, but I'm fine with having some comments.
I just wanted to make this comment that I hope that we are being as judicious as we can be on this issue or the topic of special meetings. I have been going to a ton of meetings. I only have so much of my life to devote on a volunteer basis to the city, as much as I love it and as much as I'm passionate about the issues. But it would be my request that we only do specials meetings when they're really necessary, because of a time constraint or something.
We do have one that's really especially necessary coming up at the end of August. Sorry.
I
Dan.
saw that.
Yeah,
That led to my comment. I thought,
We
holy
thought-
cow, another
yeah.
special meeting.
right, sorry.
No,
We've got
no,
UGB twice a month. We've got.
Yeah.
we have a lot of that going on.
We've got a lot of meetings.
All right,
We're
and
not getting paid.
no worries, no worries. Bill Bryan. All right, cool. I will move on to an adjournment. The next regular meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, August 1st, 2023. It is now 8:31 PM. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.